Hello, and welcome to the third hour of Tell Me Everything here on Sirius XM Progress. I'm Joe Sudbay, guest hosting for John, who's been a little under the weather, and I have had a great time so far, and I am so excited, you guys, that our next guest could join us kind of at the last minute. Welcome, David Neer from Daily Kos. How are you? Oh, I can't hear David.
Joe, I am doing so great.
David, I was thinking the last time we spoke on Sirius XM Progress was at about 4 a.m. on November 9th. And it was one of the most exciting conversations we've ever had, and we've had a lot on the air. And I was thinking about that today because how many times I heard over the past couple of days, actually, Republican members who were nominating Kevin McCarthy talk about their small majority. And they were boastful about, well, we've got a small majority, but blah, blah, blah. And, David, they do have a small majority, and they did that to themselves. And I just wonder if there's any sense of introspection among any of them as to why that happened. And I just doubt it.
Joe, I have to disagree with you. A majority means that you can elect a speaker. We are at the end of day 3, and there's no speaker. So as far as I'm concerned, the GOP doesn't have a majority worth squat.
Yeah. That's a really, really, really good point. And because they don't have a majority, we don't have a House of Representatives right now, either a functioning House of Representatives. And along those lines, you wrote a piece at Daily Kos yesterday, and it was really provocative, but I loved it. It was titled, "What Happens If Republicans Never Pick a Speaker?" It'd be good news, actually. Talk about that, David.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strange place to find myself being a nihilist like this. But the fact of the matter is, if Republicans do ever get around to picking a speaker, putting aside the fact that whoever that is will be the weakest speaker of the House probably in American history, they're instantly going to start their bullshit investigations, their trumped up charges, and try to grind down the gears of government. And of course, much of the traditional media will breathlessly repeat all of their completely bogus findings, just like we saw with Benghazi and a million other times. B, they're not going to pass any legislation. Their goal is not to govern. They've made that really, really clear as a political party for many years now. They don't believe in governance. They only care about politics and owning the libs. So let's say they don't pick a House and the House can't actually do any work, which means that no matter what the Senate does, no legislation whatsoever can pass. Well, you wouldn't have those garbage quote unquote investigations from Republicans. And like I said, Republicans wouldn't be passing legislation anyway. So that wouldn't change. We still would have no legislation passing. Now, at a certain point, yes, there are 2 key deadlines at which we really have to start thinking about actually passing something, because otherwise something really bad will happen. The first one is the debt ceiling deadline, which is probably going to hit sometime this summer. This is this artificial cap that says that the United States government can only issue so much debt in order to meet its obligations. And Republicans have tried to make raising this cap. They've tried to take hostages whenever it's come up in the past, most notoriously under John Boehner. So the debt ceiling does have to be raised. Otherwise, we could potentially spark a global financial meltdown if the U.S., for the first time in American history, defaults on its debt. And U.S. debt is considered the safest sort of debt in the entire world. But, Joe, do you remember the platinum coin?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes.
So there are a lot of people who say that the debt ceiling actually isn't even constitutional because the 14th Amendment to the Constitution says that the debts of the United States government shall not be questioned, so on and so forth. And there are other really, really smart people out there who have come up with all kinds of creative ways of getting around the debt ceiling. And my favorite one of all time, and I think a lot of people really love this one, is that there is this power granted to the president to mint a platinum coin. And it's, I think, generally supposed to be thought of as a commemorative coin, but it doesn't cap the denomination. So Joe Biden could mint a $1 trillion platinum coin, and boom, no more debt ceiling problem. Now, Barack Obama refused to do this, but he was, I think, much more, I don't know, he was less interested in taking radical approaches to dealing with a completely radicalized opposition. And I feel like Joe Biden has learned a few things that Obama never learned. So if, let's say, there's no House and it's August and we hit the debt ceiling, well, I'm certain, actually, I'm 100% certain that Joe Biden would find every creative measure he possibly could to avoid defaulting on our debt, because he'd say, look, there's literally no Congress. We have to do something. And I'm sure that he would. Now, I don't want to ramble on forever, but the real drop dead date would be in October. You know, one of the things that the Matt Gaetzes are so pissed about was that omnibus spending bill, the bill that, you know, it gets this, you know, wonky term omnibus, but what it means is this is the bill that allows the government to keep the lights on and stay functioning. It pays for our government. And thankfully it passed preserving a lot of mainstream progressive priorities, but that funding will run out in October. So there simply has to be some kind of spending bill to keep the lights on for the next year after that. But if there isn't, then there would be a government shutdown. Now, a government shutdown is really, really bad, and it's something we should try to avoid. It's not as bad as defaulting on our debt. But if there's a Republican, if there's a Republican shutdown, if there's a government shutdown caused by Republicans in October, because Republicans still haven't managed to pick a Speaker of the House like 10 months in, dude, in 2024, they'd be lucky to win 150 seats.
You know, David, if we were texting over the break and in the lead up to this, and you know, if we had thought about this last week, we would have both laughed and said, this is so absurd. But after watching these past 3 days, nothing seems out of the question, right? It has really been amazing and stunning, but not surprising to see them behave this way. So they should be thinking of all these backup plans. The Biden administration should be thinking of all these backup plans. And I think back to that time in 2010, in 2011, when, you know, there were so many threats to, you know, to our basic economy and blowing up the world economy with the debt ceiling. And Obama, for all his strengths, really, I think, never fully grasped what the Republican Party had become. But 11, 12 years later, it is so obvious to everyone, even to someone like Joe Biden, who, you know, is as kind of institutional about D.C. as you can get.
You know, Joe, you said something a moment ago that I think really, really bears underlining. You said it's stunning, but it's not surprising. Mm. It is stunning because, I mean, what an embarrassing shit show for, you know, supposedly the oldest democracy in the world. And you know, we're supposed to be the leaders of the free world. But it's not surprising because this nihilism has been growing, metastasizing is the better way to put it, within the Republican Party for a very, very long time. And, you know, we spend most of our time, Joe, hammering Republicans, but the other group that we often bring in for criticism is the traditional media. Because, I mean, I don't know if you agree with me, but reading so many of these reports in so many of these traditional media outlets over the last few days, it seems like reporters are genuinely surprised and shocked. They can't believe this is happening. I'm like, dude, where have you been?
I've had that exact same feeling. I'm like, you know, just I set up and I know you did too, a Twitter list of kind of you know, reporters to watch on the Hill, and they just see, especially the ones who are more of the I call them the gossip columnist types, the ones who who thrive on their access, and they're so into the weeds that they never take a step back. And, if you were reading them over the, last week, they were kind of like, well, McCarthy's going to get it. McCarthy's got a plan. He's going to get it. And they were believing that because their little sources inside McCarthy's team were telling them that, and they went along with it. And they do seem genuinely surprised. And I'm like, how could you be surprised? Do you not know who these people are? You see them every day. But it really is interesting. I think when you're so inside the Capitol, you lose perspective on what you're actually seeing, and it all becomes about your next scooplet as opposed to what the big picture is. And I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think they have done a tremendous disservice. There's both sidesing bullshit that they've been doing forever, and one side fundamentally does not believe in democracy. I mean, we're coming up on the anniversary of the very event that showed it more than anything. And we're still having to deal with that kind of stuff in the media. It's maddening.
Joe, you had a tweet that blew up, and I was really glad to see that. You were calling out Andrea Mitchell, right?
Yes.
Veteran reporter, been around a really long time. And here she is saying, don't Democrats have a responsibility for the sake of the country and the institution to bail out Republicans? F you, lady. What? Are you kidding? I mean, Republicans gerrymandered themselves into this squeaker of a not real majority. This is on them. This is 1,000,000,000% on them. They own all of this. And no, it is not the responsibility of the good, responsible parent to bail out the drunken parent who's sitting in the drunk tank right now down at the station house.
It's so true, David. I had flipped on MSNBC, and I try to avoid her show, but she was talking to Debbie Dingell, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, and she wanted to know if any Democrat would support McCarthy for the sake of the institution. And I was like, what the hell? Are you kidding me? And it was one of these tweets that just blew up. 13,000 likes, 2,500 retweets.
Wow.
But people were so furious. Because it's like, what is wrong with you people? And it was just she was just a personification of it. But you see the same kind of thing. You do see this in the media. Like, are Democrats going to cut a deal with Republicans? Like, why don't Republicans cut a deal with Democrats? And you ask that question, and they look at you like you're crazy. But and I think a lot of focus has to be on those 18 Republicans who are in Biden-held seats. And that's something, the first people to identify that for me were you and your colleagues at Daily Kos Elections. They are in a fix. And now some of them are true believers, but this creates a conundrum for them. What do you think about that moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, look, to your other point, Hakeem Jeffries has gotten 212 votes every single time.
Yep.
He only needs what is it, 5 or 6 more Republicans, whereas McCarthy would need 20 Democrats. So who's the unifying force here? The McCarthy needs 4 times as many votes to make up the deficit. So in terms of those vulnerable Republicans, I mean, they are watching their reelection chances swirl down the toilet, and they're not even sworn in. I mean, like, forget about a honeymoon period. Do we even have like an analogy for this situation? I mean, God, man, I don't know. It's like spending the first night after your wedding in a garbage dump. But yeah, I mean, let's say some deal does emerge and McCarthy does become speaker by, giving up his firstborn, his secondborn, and thirdborn, et cetera, et cetera. The House is going to be such an utter shit show. That's a word that's obviously been used endlessly. And the craziest lunatics, the farthest of the far right, will be in charge because McCarthy will know that, a single one of them can call for a vote to oust him as speaker. And he's going to have to give in to the worst, most disgusting, salacious investigations of Hunter Biden's laptop. And like, you got these guys like the dude who beat Sean Patrick Maloney, Mike Lawler, in the Hudson Valley in New York. Like, he wants to tackle inflation and, secure the border and work on, create good paying jobs. And man, the GOP plan, they don't have anything about inflation. Only Hunter Biden's laptop. That's it. So what are those guys going to run on in 2024?
Well, it's exactly right. And first of all, inflation's going down. It looks like it's getting under control,
Yeah.
which is important, and gas prices are going down. But that was let's talk about the traditional media with that too, rolling into the 2022 elections. Remember how they were so mad at annoyed at Biden because he gave that speech about democracy the week before the election and didn't
Yes.
mention inflation because Republicans were telling them inflation was the issue. And it's like whatever Republicans tell them is the issue. And even though they were saying that was the issue, they had no plans for inflation then either.
Yes.
My God.
I mean, and that's the thing. You would hope, you'd be wrong, but you would hope that after getting so misled by Republicans, and just after Republicans making it clear that they don't have their finger on the pulse of American politics in the 2022 elections, that reporters would be a little bit more skeptical of their read on the politics of electing a House Speaker. But you got all these stenographers. That's how I think of a lot of these reporters who just tweet Republican statements without any,
Yep.
critical analysis or thought whatsoever. But the amazing thing, Joe, is, did you see that statement from, I'll probably botch the pronunciation of his name, but Republican Guy Reschenthaler from Pennsylvania? He's the one who said that, well, let's wait to see what happens with these holdouts when, Tucker Carlson goes medieval on them tonight. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I hadn't seen that. That's interesting.
Yeah. And of course Tucker Carlson was cheering these guys on because he hates McCarthy and he likes chaos. So like this is one of like McCarthy's top allies supposedly, and like he doesn't even understand the conservative media ecosystem. Like there's no way that Tucker Carlson is coming out to bust Matt Gaetz's ass over McCarthy.
It really it's honest to God, and yet how many times over the past few days you see little sirens in tweets or scoop or breaking,
right.
and it's like, or I saw a couple today, breaking, looks like there's a deal. They're all talking about who's going in whose offices. Like it's like junior high school. Well, so-and-so was talking to so-and-so and so-and-so said this about so-and-so. It's like, oh my God, you people you're juveniles. But then the kicker is always, but it still isn't enough to make McCarthy speaker.
Right. Right. That's not a deal. By definition, that's not a deal. Yeah, you're totally right. Those tweets about so-and-so is going into such and such's office, it's like passing notes in middle school. Do you like me? Yes, no. I mean, God, I don't understand what the value add is supposed to be for that. So, well, Joe, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
How many more votes do you think they're going to be?
Oh, well, what they do today, 5. I think tomorrow there'll be. I think we might hit 20. I actually do. I think there's a good chance we could
10
hit 20
votes in one day.
Not 10 tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
I think I don't think he'll get it tomorrow. Maybe some miracle will happen or something. But the question, when I have a question, is do they stay in over the weekend? Because there's nothing members of Congress hate more than having to work on a weekend.
Which includes Friday for them.
Which includes, like right now, like the fact that they had to work on a Thursday evening, David, is like just God. Appalling. They can't believe it. So they have to be there on Friday, and are they going to have to be there Saturday? And they might lose a few votes. Republicans might lose a few votes over the weekend because of some personal situations people have. I saw, but this is. So I think the question is: do we go through the weekend, and or do they go home and see what happens and come back Monday? And I think we'll get 4 or 5 votes tomorrow, and I don't think he gets it before 20. What do you think?
Yeah, I keep getting texts from people. How does this end? We are so deep into the looking glass, I can't even begin to imagine how this ends. I mean, like, man, about to say maybe it ends with him cutting the most abasing himself as much as possible and cutting the most sort of supplicative deal. But even then, I'm like, I say that out loud and I hear myself and I'm like, I don't even think that does it,
Yeah.
because some of these Republicans just hate him on a personal basis. And it's not about what he's offering, but about who he is. And there have been some illuminating articles that I've read. And in one of them, it described McCarthy as sort of your prototypical backslapping Paul, who he does workouts with you in the Capitol gym, and knows when your kids' birthdays are. And for these hardcore far right Republicans, the fact that he's even willing to make any kind of deals at all and even be in a room with a Democrat is complete anathema to them. They want someone who hates Democrats, will never talk to a Democrat, will never look them in the eye. And McCarthy can't give them that because they know who he is.
David, when you have to talk about whether you're a weaker speaker,
weaker speaker. Oh God.
Like even just saying the words, dude, like you are a weaker speaker if you're saying
Yes.
you're not a weaker speaker. I mean, come on.
I mean, it sounds like he is almost speaking in the way that the New York Daily News would write their front page of their tabloid, the weaker speaker. I mean, like, there's a 50% chance that that's going to be the Wood tomorrow in the Daily News.
Yeah. Couple other members I want to talk about.
Yes.
First of all, let's just take a minute and talk about the third ranking Republican, Elise Stefanik. I'm just like, the New York Times article about her this past weekend was, I have to give a shout out to Nick Confessori. I come down hard on reporters, and we have been doing that tonight. And I actually did a deep dive article with Nick Confessori when I was working on the gun violence issue. I know how deep he dives and how thorough he is. That piece was one of the most luscious articles I had read in a long time. What a craven! Oh my God.
Yeah, she is just an absolute scoundrel who, I guess, initially set herself up as a different kind of Republican and, opposed to Trumpism. And then once it suited her, once she realized that, oh, she could take Liz Cheney's slot at the top of the pecking order, she completely turned tail. You know what, Joe, though, as horrifying as it is, again, it's one of those things, I'm just not surprised.
Yeah. This is a woman who was one of the first Republicans to espouse the replacement theory. And she kept with it even after that horrific massacre in Buffalo, where the shooter espoused the replacement theory. And what was interesting about this article is, and it's something I had heard Tim Miller, who used to be a Republican, say he worked with her, like how he thinks she's the worst of all of them. And the kicker to Nick Confessori's article in the New York Times was, I mean, you read this article and you're like, oh my God, it just keeps getting worse. And then you get to the end and she's so bad that Trump doesn't trust her. I mean, you have to sink pretty low in your life to be, completely distrusted and considered kind of vile by Donald Trump. And that's who the third ranking Republican is.
I mean, I think that reminds me of, I think it's a quote allegedly attributed to Richard Nixon, who supposedly said, Barbara Bush, now there's a woman who knows how to hate. Right? That's like Michael Jordan saying you're good at basketball,
Oh, my goodness.
All right. Who was the other one you wanted to talk about?
Oh, well, you wrote about him this week as well. And that is a new member from New York, George Santos. I mean,
for now.
And, look, I have, first of all, the first stories were really interesting. They were about his lying about his record and lying about everything, really.
Lying about his lying.
Yes. But now late last week, it turned into the criming aspect of it. And there's some serious criming aspect. I mean, one of the things I think is fascinating is the funding for the DeVolder Group, which is where he's claimed to get all his money. And the Daily Beast did a deep dive and got really broke some information, and it looks like a lot of New York Republican funders were involved. And all of a sudden, it starts to look like a conspiracy. Then there's the issue of his wife, who he married a woman, even though he's openly gay, and he was dating men throughout it. I mean, if you're the if you're the district attorney for the Eastern District of New York, I think you've got a lot to work with.
Absolutely. Joe, since you mentioned the Daily Beast, I do want to give a shout out to one of their reporters, Matt Fuller, who I would say is the number one guy to follow for this McCarthy stuff. He's awesome. You will be smarter reading him. But let's get back to Santos. So, the amazing thing, I was thinking about it just the other day. He is under investigation or being looked into by authorities at, so wait for it, the local level, because Nassau County DA says they're looking at him. The state level, the Attorney General's office says they're, poking around. Like you just said, the feds, the Eastern District of New York, and international, because the Brazilian prosecutors have reopened the case against him for check fraud from like a decade ago that they had to abandon, I guess, because he fled the country. So of all those, though, the one that you mentioned is by far the most serious. And that's the campaign finance shenanigans. So that makes it sound all fun and games. The campaign finance wrongdoing that he appears to have committed. And I say that because, there are so few white collar crimes prosecuted in this country, and politicians get away with unbelievable corruption, especially the stock trading. It just makes me sick to my stomach. But the one thing that politicians, especially federal office holders, do tend to get busted for is if they spend campaign funds for personal use. And there's no doubt in my mind that Santos did so. Particularly with the absurd amount of flights he was taking. Like no one running for the House takes like hundreds of flights. He lives it's like a small compact suburban district. Are you kidding? And he was flying all across the country and charging it to his campaign. So my feeling is that he will go down for that. It might take a while, but I think that's how his career is going to end.
Well, it is. He has given us. Last week he gave us a lot to talk about. This week we can't forget about him amidst all the other news that we're trying to keep track of. David Neer, it is always so great to talk to you. You're on Twitter at David Neer, Daily Coast Elections. I tell everyone, sign up for the Morning Digest. I mean, it was really weird last week. I know you guys needed your vacation, but I was on the air a couple days and I didn't have my Morning Digest.
I'm so sorry.
No, I appreciate it. And also you have the podcast, The Down Ballot, which is also terrific. Thank you so much, David. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Joe, this was a blast. Can't wait for the next time.
All right, take care. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a few.